Paul in Galatians 6:1 said, if anyone is caught in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one. How? In a spirit of gentleness, each one looking to yourself, lest you also, or that you will not be tempted. And then it's 2 Timothy 2:24, the Lord's bondservant must not be quarrelsome, but be kind to all, patient when wronged, with how? Gentleness, correcting those who are in opposition, if perhaps God may grant them, this is the goal, repentance leading to the knowledge of the truth. Well, this is what we're going to discuss this morning. Number one, the fixity of animal kinds disproves macroevolution. B, animals can vary or change within their own kind. That's microevolution. But that does not extrapolate to macroevolution, microbe to man. Let's review a slide we've looked at a number of times. What is evolution? They teach that it occurs by two mechanisms. First is errors or mutations in the genetic code. This creates mutant species which are able to outcompete the wild type. They call that natural selection. But did you know the philosophy of macroevolution is not new? It's been a strongly held philosophical conviction for thousands of years before man ever tried to make it scientific. And as we've discussed earlier in this weekend, it's an a priori philosophy. A priori means from the former. So they arrive at their conclusions before scientific experiments are done. Really, it's cheating. Science is supposed to be a posteriori. You only arrive at the conclusions after the experiments. So macroevolution was believed and accepted and taught before it was scientifically tested. How do we know that? Well, we can go back and just look at what has been taught. Dr. H.F. Osborne from Harvard said, from the earliest stages of Greek thought, man has been eager to discover some natural cause of evolution and to abandon the idea of the supernatural intervention in the order of nature. People have been wanting to do away with God. And we know that man has been trying to do this at least for 3,000 years, because the psalmist tells us in Psalm 14:1 and 53:1 that the fool has said in his heart there is no God, so they have to have an alternative explanation for how we got here. Even the ancient Greeks, as far back as Thales in 588 BC, was proposing evolution. There were many people prior to Darwin in his day, in his era, that proposed evolution. Here are a number of them. We won't take time to talk about them, but notice in the right-hand bottom corner, this is his grandfather, Erasmus Darwin. He even proposed a mechanism of evolution. Well, what was the significance of Darwin then? If people have been proposing this for 3,000 years, here was the significance. Charles Darwin used what is called a logical fallacy. That's an error in the chain of argumentation or reasoning. It's known as the fallacy of equivocation. That's just a fancy word, a fancy way of describing what we know as bait and switch. Do you remember when Lucy used to hold the football for Charlie Brown? And right before he got there, what would she do? She would pull it out from him. That's what Charles Darwin did to us. And here's how he did it. Here's how Charles Darwin did the bait and switch. We know evolution is true, and what he meant was macroevolution, microbe to man, because we see microevolution happening all the time. Dogs changing into different varieties of dogs. Well, that's a non sequitur. That does not follow, because dogs changing into different varieties is only microevolution, not macro. Microbe to man. It's been said Darwin demonstrated survival of the fittest. However, in order to prove macroevolution, he could not explain arrival of the fittest. So again, the microevolution maxim is Animals can vary within their kind, microevolution, but not outside their kind, macroevolution. Now, if you bring this up to your teachers or professor, a common response is they're going to tell you there's no micro and macroevolution. It's all the same. You'll see that all over the internet. If they say that to you, you need to remind them it's not the creationists that came up with this idea of micro and macroevolution. That was the evolutionists that came up with that concept. Notice Dr. Theodosius Dobzhansky. He was one of the architects of the modern synthesis, also known as Neo-Darwinism, that stole Gregor Mendel, a creationist gene theory, and combined it with Darwin's survival of the fittest. And this is what he said. It is impossible to reproduce in the laboratory the evolution of man. Experimental evolution deals of necessity with only the simplest levels of evolutionary process, sometimes called what? Microevolution. You might say, is this a biblical concept? I think it is. Notice in Genesis 1:21, so God created great sea creatures and every living thing that moves with which the waters abounded according to their what? Their kind, not their species, their kind. And every winged bird according to its kind. Verse 24, God said, let the earth bring forth a living creature according to its kind. Cattle and creeping things and beasts of the earth, each according to its kind. And it was so, and God made the beast of the earth according to its kind. Cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. Now, this word kind comes from the Hebrew word men. And the Hebrew word for created is bara, so you have a baramin, a created kind. From that was derived the study of baraminology. Baraminology. So baraminology is a creationist taxonomic classification to try to go back and see what were the original kinds in the Garden of Eden. What were the original kinds on the ark from which all the different varieties diverged? Baraminology says different kinds cannot interbreed and they have no evolutionary relationship to one another. Of course, Charles Darwin and your teachers are going to tell you that evolution occurred in the form of this tree of life with a single-cell bacterium at the bottom, evolving into all the various kinds we have today. However, as we pointed out the last few nights, it's the exact opposite. You have to flip it on its head. The greatest diversity is at the Cambrian layer, the greatest diversity of animals. In fact, even evolutionists say 99.9% of all mammalian species are now extinct. E.O. Wilson says we're losing 30,000 species of animal life, various types of life, a year. That's 82 a day or 3.4 per hour. While we're sitting here today, on average, we're going to lose 7 species of different insects and other types of animals around the world. What does that mean? That means animals are not evolving and making new kinds. We're losing them. So life might be better depicted instead of as a tree of life, as a forest of life. God created all the different kinds at the bottom, but notice each kind can branch out through microevolution to different varieties of dogs, different varieties of pigeons, different varieties of birds, etc. But over time, we don't see more, we see fewer. They are becoming extinct. Now let's provide some examples. I think this is especially helpful. Let's use the example of the rose. Did you know there's over 1,300 different varieties of roses? Now, were all these in the Garden of Eden? Well, we know that they weren't. How do we know that? Because for centuries, there have been people that dedicate their whole lives to breeding different types of roses. They select for color, for size, for aroma, for petal thickness. This does not mean that this is evolution into different kinds. This is only microevolution within a kind. Let's use another example. These are the canids. This is a family and genus called Canidae canis, and here we have 6 different species. The coyote, gray wolf, golden jackal, dingo, Ethiopian wolf, and domesticated dog, in which there are over 360 recognized breeds. Now the question is, were all these in the Garden of Eden? Probably not. Well, actually, we know they weren't, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But probably not. Why? Because they can all interbreed with one another. And to show you this, species is becoming more common around the country is the coy wolf, when a coyote breeds with a wolf. In fact, they've said where we live in Pennsylvania, a lot of our coyotes have a lot of wolf genes in them. And someone might respond, well, that's hard to believe. These are so diverse animals. It's hard to believe they all came from the same kind. Well, if you think there's a lot of difference in these animals, what about these two that we showed last night, the miniature Chihuahua and the Great Dane? Did you know creation scientists as well as evolutionary scientists all agree that all 360 recognized species of dogs originated from the wolf or a wolf-like ancestor? And I'll just throw this in, that we've had Chihuahuas in our family since 1980. And if you don't believe the Chihuahua came from the wolf, then you simply haven't been around Chihuahuas. And your teachers, though, they'll say, well, see, that's evolution. The wolf evolved into the Great Dane and the Chihuahua. Well, the problem is they have lost genetic information. They're not gaining new genes. You could take a wolf in a few centuries, breed down to a Chihuahua. But you can never take a Chihuahua and breed back up into a wolf. Why? Because it's lost those characteristics. It's lost those features. And for evolution to occur, what did Charles Darwin say would have to occur? The survival of the fittest. What would happen if you released the Great Dane and the Chihuahua into the Arctic? Well, the Great Dane, its hair is too short. It wouldn't be able to hunt as well. It would die off. The Chihuahua would make a quick snack for the Arctic wolves. This is not evolution, but this is one of the most common examples that teachers use with children. They say, see, Chihuahua and Great Dane, that's evolution. No, that's devolution. Here's another example. What about the lion and the tiger? Were they both in the Garden of Eden? You know, in some of the children's pictures, the Garden of Eden is depicted with the tiger and the lion there. But were they both in the Garden of Eden? Maybe, maybe not, probably not. Why? Because they can both interbreed. And depending on which is the male or the female, it produces either a liger or a tigon. But here's the point. Each of the animals, lion and tiger, have lost the genetic material of its previous ancestor. In fact, when you cross these animals, you may be getting back to what the original kind was. We call it hybrid vigor, when you combine the genes back to its original kind. In fact, the largest cat in the world is the liger, 920 pounds. And do we find anything like this in the fossil record? I think so. In 2021, this came across my news feed, newly identified giant saber-toothed cat roamed North America 5 to 9 million years ago. It was up to how much? 900 pounds. That's how much the liger weighs. So the liger may represent what may have been the original kind, maybe like a saber-toothed cat. Let's use some more examples. What about the domesticated cat and the caracal, a cat that's in Africa and the Middle East? Were these both in the Garden of Eden? Probably not. The domesticated cat maybe have come from that. Why? Because you breed them and it produces a caracal. This is not microbe to man evolution. This is just microevolution, not macroevolution. Well, what about the horse and the zebra? Were they both in the garden? Well, you'd like to believe so. They're such amazing, beautiful creatures. But we have to agree they may have come from a common ancestor, because depending on which is the male and female, it produces either a zorse or a zebroid. And someone asked me one time, no, this is not Photoshop. You can look this up. That is a zebroid. This is not evolving into different kinds through macroevolution, only variation within a kind, microevolution. Well, what about the zebra and the donkey? They may have come from an original ancestor because depending on which is the male and the female, you breed them, it creates either a Z-donk or a donk-Z. Not a different kind, only variations within the kind. Well, what about the polar bear and the grizzly bear? Were they both in the Garden of Eden? Maybe not. Why? Because they can interbreed. Depending on which is the male and the female, it produces either a Gurtler bear or a Pisley. Now, what about the zebra and the rhinoceros? Were they both in the Garden of Eden? Well, their predecessors probably were. Why? Because we don't see any rhinebra. Now, I'm going to show you some pictures here, and they're kind of funny and comical, but I want to make a very powerful point from it after we go through them. We don't see any of these cross species across different kinds. No bird dogs, foxbirds, giraffe turtles, gorilla crows, leopard squirrels, pug horses, bunny birds, or pug monkeys. Now, the evolutionists will say this is a ridiculous, unrealistic interpretation of what we believe. Really? Really? Let me show you what they teach your children in public school. Every public school textbook across the country teaches what you're about to see. They teach that dinosaurs turned into birds. This picture is just as ridiculous as the ones I just showed you, but that's what they are teaching children with your taxpayer dollars. A feathered dinosaur has never been found, even though they teach your children that. Pure science fiction. In fact, a paleontologist in the 1980s, Dr. Dale Russell, came up with this wild idea. He said if the Troodon dinosaur, which was one with a large brain, grasping claws similar to human hands, if it hadn't become extinct, he said it would have evolved into the dinosauroid that kind of looks like humans. This was even put in the children's textbook, in a children's book, as you can see here, that was written by Rupert Matthews. Do you know what this is? This is pure science fiction, peddled as truth. And they accuse us of, oh, you're the ones, you Christians, you don't believe in science. You only have faith. Now who are the ones trusting in science and the ones believing in science fiction? It's not us. But should we be surprised? As we pointed out last night, we shouldn't be surprised. Paul said in 2 Timothy 3:13, but evil men and impostors will proceed from bad to worse, deceiving and being deceived. And that's what's going on in public schools. 2 Timothy 3:7, Paul says there are individuals always learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. I want to show you some more examples. What about the American bison, which the European explorers misnamed buffalo? The American bison and domesticated cattle, of which there are over 800 breeds. Were both of these in the garden? Maybe not. They may be different varieties of a common ancestor. Why? Because we know we can interbreed them and create beefalo. This is not microbe to man macroevolution. This is microevolution, variation within a kind. In fact, there are 14 members of the cattle kind which may have all descended from a common ancestor. They are the American bison, domesticated cattle, the musk ox, the Cape buffalo. After I used this slide a number of times, we hunted a number of Amish and Mennonite farms, and I would look at some of these large Holstein bulls, and I would look at this picture, and it reminded me of it. They may have come from the same ancestor. Then, number 6, there's the auroch. This is the progenitor to all domesticated cattle, 800 breeds. The last one died in France in 1627. All cattle came from the auroch. Then there's the wild yak, and just to show you they can't interbreed, you cross the wild yak with domesticated cattle, and it produces yaddle. You cross the wild yak with American bison, and it results in yakalo. There's the Asian Banting. Number 8, the Southeastern Asian gray ox. Number 9, the Indian bison. And then notice number 10, the European bison. Now we notice there are some similarities between the European bison and the American bison. They both may have come from the same ancestor. There's the Asian buffalo, the Mindoro dwarf buffalo, the Indonesian lowland Anoa, and the mountain Anoa. Now let's go back to the auroch, from which all domesticated cattle came from. So according to the scripture, God made animals according to their kind. There may have been original cattle kind. And from the auroch, we selected for lots of different characteristics in cattle. Well, how could you go back to the auroch? Well, you could take some of the 800 breeds of cattle, breed them, and try to breed back by combining their genes back. So maybe you cross a Charolais with a Simmental, with a Shorthorn, with a Santa Gertrudis, something like that. Well, that's exactly what a Dutch backbreeding project has done, and they've tried to recreate the auroch. I'll let you decide whether they did a good job or not. But here's the point. They all descended from a common ancestor because they're all the same kind. But you can't change them into another kind. Here's a very interesting one that makes a powerful point. What about the camel and the llama? Now, according to evolution, the camel and the llama are separated by 7,500 miles, and they say they've been separated for 11 to 25 million years. But evolution also says that due to geographical distinction, separation, and inbreeding, after a few thousand or 100,000 years, these animals should not be able to interbreed anymore. Well, guess what? After supposed 11 to 25 million years, the llama and the camel can still breed, and it produces a comma. What does this tell us? These animals have not been separated for 11 to 25 million years, maybe a few thousand years at the most. Now, based on everything we've discussed, we can go back to Genesis 1 and see if this rings true, as now you understand that God made these kinds that can vary within their kind but not outside their kind. In Genesis 1:24, we read, "Then God said, 'Let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind, cattle and creeping things, and beasts of the earth, each according to its kind.'" So we have lots of different kinds, but they can't change into other kinds. A finch will always be a finch, a snake, a turtle, a bat, a rat, a cat, a dog, a pig, a monkey, and a man. And they will never be able to change into other kinds. Although we see a great diversity within each kind, just like the Bible said. No microbe to man, only variations, microevolution within the kind. So far this morning, what have you learned about animal kinds? The fixity of animal kinds disproves Darwinian evolution. Animals can change within their own kind, microevolution, not outside their kind, macroevolution. So you might say, well, then what constitutes a species? How do you decide what a species is? Well, as someone has said, a species is whatever a good taxonomist says it is. There is no true definition of a species. You know, the two peppered moths we showed you last night, they've recently said that now they're two different species just because one has more melanin than the other. That would be like saying some humans have more melanin in their skin than others, therefore they're a different species. It's a very plastic and fluid idea of species. What you need to remember is that animal kinds do not change, and that's usually at the family level if you look at the Linnaean taxonomic system. Well, the last thing we're going to look at, I decided to throw in at the end of this lesson 4 final frequently asked questions. These are some of the most commonly asked questions that I didn't cover originally in my lessons. Number 1, how did Noah fit all those animals in the ark? That's one question that a lot of people ask. There are thousands and thousands of different kinds of animals. Noah couldn't have fit all those animals in the ark. Well, first let's just look at the size of the ark itself. In Genesis, the 6th chapter, notice in verse 14, God told Noah, "Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. You shall make the ark with rooms and cover it inside and outside with pitch. This is how you shall make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits." Now, we typically say a cubit is about 18 inches from the elbow to the tip of a man's finger, so we usually say 18 inches. A lot of Hebrew scholars have settled really on about 21 inches because there are a number of different cubits used in the Middle East. In fact, the Egyptian cubit was 36 inches. So we really don't know exactly how long the cubit is, but we'll use the shorter version and just say it is 18 inches, 1.5 feet. If that's the case, notice in verse 15, the ark would have been 300 cubits or 450 feet long or 1.5 football fields long. Its breadth, 50 cubits wide or 75 feet wide, and its height, 30 cubits or 45 feet tall. And notice this, you shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. Now, if you do the math on that, that comes up to over 500,000 cubic feet of space. But that's only on one deck. And you've got 3 decks, that's over 1.5 million cubic feet of space. That's a lot of space. You want to know how much that is? That's equivalent to 627 standard freight carriers or 500 tractor trailers, which would be a line of tractor trailers 117 football fields long. That's a lot of room. But still, people would say that's still not enough room to fit all the thousands of different species of animals on the earth in there. But what have you learned so far? Not every species would have had to have been on there. Only every what? Every kind. And baraminologists, when they go back and try to decide what was the original kind that was in the Garden of Eden, they estimate, I've seen numbers lower than this, but they estimate there may have only been 1,400 animal kinds if you break them down back into their original kind. You wouldn't have had to have hundreds and hundreds of different types of cattle. It may have been only 2 original cattle kind. And someone might say, well, there are thousands of different types of dinosaurs. Not if you break them down into their original kinds. For example, here's an infraorder of dinosaurs known as the Ceratopsia, 11 different types of dinosaurs. Now, of these, would Noah have had to put all of these in the ark? Maybe not. Why? Because baraminologists think they may have all come from the same kind. And the one with the most genetic diversity may have been the original kind, the Pachyrhinosaurus. Of course, we don't know that. But it does seem to have the greatest phenotypic diversity within it. Also, the dinosaurs are so big, they couldn't have fit them in the ark. Well, who says that Noah had to have taken a full-grown adult dinosaur? He could have taken juveniles or even eggs. You know, the largest dinosaur egg is only about the size of a football. And you know the average size of a dinosaur, of all the dinosaurs, was only about the size of a sheep, only about 100 pounds. In fact, many dinosaurs were the size of chickens, and there were even dinosaurs the size of lizards. So that's response answer to the first question. Here's the second question. What do similarities in human and chimp DNA indicate? This is one that's commonly used in colleges and high schools. Well, evolutionists have been telling us for decades that the chimp DNA and human DNA are 99% similar. So they say you are 99% chimp and only 1% difference. Well, in 2005, the prestigious journal Nature had a special issue dedicated to the chimp genome when they sequenced all the genes in the chimp. And this is what they concluded. They said it was the most dramatic confirmation yet. One headline stated, Charles Darwin was right and the chimp gene map proved it. What did they prove? They were only covering themselves here. They actually found that there was 300% greater difference between chimp and human DNA. We're not 99% similar to the chimp. We're only 96% similar to the chimp. And yet the teachers in school will still say, see, you're 96% chimp. So you evolved from the chimpanzee. Well, how big is the human DNA? If you take the whole genome of human DNA, it's actually 3 billion base pairs, 3 billion matched codons. Well, what is 4% of 3 billion? That would be 120 million differences. There are 120 million base pair differences between chimps and humans. You don't think that's a big deal? Well, sickle cell anemia that's killing thousands of people all around the world, and we're spending millions of dollars trying to eradicate it. Sickle cell anemia is only 1 base pair difference, not 120 million base pairs difference. We are much different than chimps. Furthermore, this evolutionary process supposedly occurred in only 300,000 generations, or 6 million years. You can't see humans evolving today because it took 300,000 generations. Well, are there any types of life, animal life, that have shorter generation times than humans, about 20 years? Yes, the fruit fly. Only it multiplies about every 7 to 10 days. Or what about the bacteria? There are certain bacteria that multiply every 6 minutes. But for an illustration, we're going to use the enteric bacteria that commonly multiply every 20 minutes. And a bacteria that multiplies in 20 minutes, every 20 minutes, in only 14 years, it goes through over 360,000 generations. That would be equivalent to 13.1 million years in supposed human evolutionary time in 25 years. There's actually a project called the Linsky Project that has been multiplying E. coli for 37 years, since 1988, trying to prove evolution. Do you know what they've proven? Nothing. In 37 years, they've never found one persistent, beneficial, structural change. Number 3, what about the dinosaurs? This is one of the most common questions that children ask. Dinosaurs have been one of the most powerful tools to convince children of evolution. Well, where do they fit into the Bible? Well, notice Genesis 1:24. God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things and beasts of the earth after their kind." And it was so. The Bible teaches that all land creatures were created on the 6th day of creation. What is a dinosaur? A land creature? So dinosaurs were created on the sixth day of creation. But someone might say, well, why doesn't the Bible mention dinosaurs? There may be three reasons. Number one, dinosaur fossils were not known to be discovered until 1822. The word dinosaur was not invented until 1841. I suggest dinosaurs may have been previously known by the name dragon, as a couple of books have in the back. In fact, why do all major cultures in the world have dragon legends? In fact, all over the world you see these pictures and depictions on caves and walls and mountains with dragons. Now notice often they have wings, but if you take away the imagination, what does this dragon look like? Of course, looks very similar to a dinosaur. In fact, we see this in cultures all around the world. Hebrew, Greece, Denmark, etc. Did you know scientists have even speculated? Carl Sagan in his book said, children may be afraid of monsters because of our vestigial memory when we were fighting with the dragons. Well, there's a Hebrew tradition of dragons. Where is that? Well, notice in Job 40 in verse 15, look at the behemoth which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. See now, his strength is in his hips and his power in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. In the Middle East, the cedar was this great towering tree. But when you read the behemoth in your Bible, sometimes the footnote says this may be referring to an elephant or a hippopotamus. Does an elephant or a hippopotamus have a tail like a cedar? Well, let's see. Here's an elephant tail. Does that look like a cedar? I don't think so. What about a hippopotamus? Not like a cedar there either. So what's the significance of dinosaurs in the evolutionary controversy? Well, as Derek Ager said, their importance is grossly exaggerated. Final question real quick. What about the Ice Age? Many people ask about this. Did the Ice Age occur? As I've told many of you this weekend, with any questions you have, my favorite website is creation.com. This website has the best scientific articles from doctorates in various fields. And as I've been told, many of these people on this website write under pseudonyms, false names, so they don't end up getting fired. If you look up the Ice Age on this website, it'll turn up over 60 articles, videos, and podcasts. Well, here is how creation scientists believe the Ice Age occurred. When the great fountains of the deep were opened in Genesis and Noah's flood, lava would have poured into the oceans. Even at the poles, the average temperature of the water around the world would have been over 70 degrees. Large amounts of precipitation, the moisture would evaporate in the atmosphere. There are 10,000 inactive volcanoes in the world. They may have been active at the time because of the movement, the tectonic plate movement. This would have covered the atmosphere in soot and ash, which we find that buried in the rock layers, volcanic ash. And therefore, the precipitation would have come down at the poles as copious amounts of snow and ice. That would have created the glaciers. We may actually be coming out of the Ice Age. That may be why the glaciers are still melting. Did you know there may be a reference to the Ice Age in the ancient book of Job? Scholars think this may be the oldest book in the Bible. Now remember, before we look at these verses, where was Job written? In the Middle East. In the Middle East. Job 38:29 says, out of whose womb came the ice and the frost of the heavens? Who fathered it? The waters are hidden like a stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. Where in the Middle East now are the waters frozen? Nowhere. Job 37:9, from the chamber of the south comes the whirlwind, and the cold from the scattering winds of the north. By the breath of God, ice is given, the broad waters are frozen. Where does that happen in the Middle East now? Nowhere. These writings of Job and Elihu may indicate that they either knew by first-hand accounts or by traditions that were told from their families about the Ice Age, when waters were frozen in the Middle East. Well, thank you so much for your attention this morning. Tonight we're going to cover Exodus 31:17. Let's put our faith in God's word. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh he rested.